I think we'll kick ahead anyway. If you wouldn't mind just moving to the next slide, Matthew. So, hello everybody. Welcome to this session, which I'm really looking forward to. Budget cuts versus the cyber threats, the CISO insights. We're going to be discussing the latest cybersecurity trends and challenges, and our CISOs are dealing with these amidst the shrinking budgets, which we're all aware of, and of course the increasing cyber threats. I'm Norman Newell, Sales Director at Renaissance, been here for about 15 years. And today I'm delighted to be joined by two experts in this space. Matthew George, who I've known for many, many years. Matthew is the CEO and founder of VigiTrust, and he's also the author of the acclaimed book, The Cyber Elephant in the Boardroom. So if you haven't read it, I recommend that you do. Matthew is going to share key insights from his own ongoing research and on managing cyber risk at the executive level. And he'll also share his perspective on the latest trends and shaping the cybersecurity today. And then we're also joined by Alistair Mills. Alistair is the Director of Sales Engineering at Proofpoint, and Alistair is going to take us through the findings of Proofpoint's 2024 Voice of the CISO report. And he's going to share some real-world experiences from CISOs over the past year, and he's going to provide insights for the rest of the year ahead. But before we jump in, I just need to go through a few housekeeping items, if you don't mind. This session will be recorded for the people who are not able to attend, and also we're going to share the links with you afterwards so that if you need to, you can run back over it. Currently, all attendees are going to be muted for the session, but you will be unmuted for the Q&A portion. We encourage you to make this session as interactive as possible, so feel free to ask any questions throughout, but just drop them in the Q&A box or send them to me directly, and we'll cover as many of those as we can at the end. So you've heard enough of me, so without further ado, Matthew, it's over to you, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Newman, and good morning, everyone. Just want to thank Renaissance for putting this event together. So I'm just going to take the next 10 minutes to share my views as a veteran of the industry as to what I see in terms of the evolution of the role of the CISO, their constraints with regards to budget, getting into the boardroom, and so on. And my view is going to be probably super strategic and will probably link in very well with a more detailed research from Alistair. So just by way of introduction, I'm Matthew. I'm the founder and CEO of VigiTrust, which, despite my French accent, is actually an Irish company based in Dublin. And so, of course, Newman, Tara, and Michael Conway and I have been working together for a number of years. The company specializes in SaaS governance risk compliance solutions. And we've got an award-winning tool that allows people to prepare for, validate, and manage continuous compliance for about 100 security standards. And that's my day job. But what I really love doing is research. And as Newman said, I wrote a book called The Cyber Elephant in the Boardroom, published by Forbes and bestseller on Amazon. And it's a book about how to demystify cybersecurity for the board. And it's based on a methodology called the 5 pillars of security that I'm going to show you soon. And that was the first part of the research. You know, I was like, what do we need to do as an industry to talk to the board? But then I was like, well, who really needs to talk to the board from a cybersecurity perspective? So that's when I started doing some research on CISOs, and I'm actually in the process of writing my second book on the personal life of CISOs. And it's been absolutely fascinating. I've interviewed 75 CISOs, head of risk and head of compliance, and I will continue my interviews until I get just over 100. And I asked them all the same 16 questions in the same order about their life, about their worries about getting a sponsor in the boardroom, about getting budgets, about do they sleep at night, do they worry about the succession plan, and so on. And for each interview, I identify the top 5 topics that they talk about, and then I identify the top 10 keywords that come out. And then I anonymize all of that and I get some trends, and some of the trends are fascinating already. I'll share that with you in a minute. There are some anomalies as well. And so that piece of research is really super strategic, as opposed to extremely detailed or technical. I just wanted to mention what I call the 5 stages of cyber grief. So when the CISO goes in to talk to the board, generally speaking, they're hit with what we call the denial stage. And the denial stage is, whoa, you're the CISO, we're the board, we don't want to hear about that, come back another day. Then comes the anger. Wow, Matthew, you again. I'm sorry, but we recruited you as a CISO, and then we gave you money for firewalls, IDS, IPS, MFA, whatever. You also have a compliance team. Go and talk to them. We don't want to know about it. Then comes the bargaining. Bargaining is where they realize that their competitors are being paid a visit by the data protection authorities or by some enforcement body, maybe they've been hacked, and they're like, okay, so what we'll do is we'll get a very reputable firm to write a 60-page document that says that we're doing absolutely nothing, but we're doing it in a very structured way, and we have a 5-year strategy to become compliant. And that's really not the answer. Then comes the depression stage. The depression is, we've been hacked. The director of the Office of the Data Protection that applies to us is in our lobby demanding to talk to our CISO and our chairperson. And then eventually comes the acceptance. And the acceptance is where you need to do something. So in order to facilitate that, I created what I call the 5 pillars of security framework. And it's based on the idea that whether you look at PCI, GDPR, HIPAA, NIST, ISO, NIS2, it doesn't really matter. You always dial back to 5 common denominators. First one is physical security, people security, data security, infrastructure security, and then crisis management. What do you do when something goes wrong? And in my book, and in fact, the framework is available free of charge on our website. You can see 2 versions of it, one that is super strategic with 5 questions per pillar, so 25 questions, and one that is more operational with 60 questions, so 12 questions per pillar. And some organizations have been using this as a maturity model to find out the commitment of the board in terms of cyber. So let me share with you very briefly some of the key topics that came up from the research for my second book about the life of CISOs. So the first key thing that seems to worry CISOs are the threats. So the stuff that is really preventing them from doing their job properly. The first one is human element. And that idea that maybe at a company level, they're not really seeing that the human firewall is the first line of defense. And that first line of defense is not really well looked after. And we see that coming up every year in October for Cyber Awareness Month. And I think it's something to keep in mind. The second one is ransomware and insider threat. There's still a lot of confusion out there in the market as to whether you need to pay if you're a victim of ransomware or whether you shouldn't. My own view is that you shouldn't. But for some companies, it's a strategic decision that they'll say, well, from a financial perspective, it makes more sense to pay. Then the threat of insider threat is that it's all about legitimate employees making silly mistakes unknowingly, and then legitimate employees making real mistakes knowingly. And I think that that's one of the issues. Major concern about zero-day vulnerabilities, and that's not new. That's been there for a while, but that came up a lot in the research. The misuse of AI for the potential of risks for the algorithm being poisoned or false information coming into the algorithm or out of the algorithm, the idea of AI governance, and that came up a few times in the research. And then the non-technical risks, hence the topic today, the budget and the CISO. So the impact of stress, budget constraints, and workforce reductions on individuals and teams. And we've seen that, during COVID, obviously, a number of companies went through workforce reductions. After COVID, some of them went through a second round or a third round of workforce reductions in order to get back on track. And the security teams were not we're not totally left out of that, and that's left a lot of stress. Now, AI is obviously the second biggest topic that came up. It comes out as AI brings about security threats and potentially protection in such a way that a CISO might be able to use AI-enabled tool to go through the myriad of attacks that they see and let AI deal with the low threat level, and so that they can get the humans to concentrate on the more obscure tasks, I guess, that the AI is probably not trained to look into right now. But it's a double-edged sword. As we, the good guys, use AI, the bad guys also use AI to automate their attacks. So you've got a game of cat and mouse here, and you've got offenders and offenders and defenders using the exact same technology, and it makes for an interesting fight, because traditionally the hackers were always a little bit of ahead. They would see loopholes that we don't see, but now we actually potentially have a level playing game, and it'd be interesting to see how that moves on. But what comes out of this is the requirement for tailored policies for AI governance. Not saying, nobody said AI is completely banned. All they said was, we have a process, some people adhere to it, some don't. So you see marketing and sales departments investing through credit cards into a software-based AI tool that completely bypasses the security team, and that is a problem. Ethical considerations on AI, obviously, and then the idea that at this point in time, while it's still powerful, we still need human review and intervention, because we haven't trained our AI tools the right way just yet. The third biggest thing that comes out is cybersecurity talent. So if you bear with me, I'm French and I'm a man, so that's a disclaimer. Sometimes I offend people. Bear with me for a second. But if you're a CISO today and you've got 25 years experience, that means that if you've been a CISO for 25 years, you became one of the first CISOs. So you were probably in network security for 5 years before that, and maybe in IT for 2 or 3 years before that. So what that means is we have another 3 to 7 years with you in the market. And one of the issues here is, how do we get all of that experience that you've acquired and transfer that to the new generation? And with regards to the new generation, have we actually trained them the right way? So we always say there's a shortage. It's 100% markets in terms of job security. Well, that might be fair enough, but are we training the right people to do the right stuff? So right now there's a lot of new AI masters and so on, but are they actually addressing the AI that we see in 5 years' time? So by the time you do that masters, is it really gonna matter? We're also seeing that there are, obviously, and that was always the case, but there's differences in what different generations want. And so the younger generation wants everything like this, because that's the way they've always had it. Everything is instant. Whereas the older generation, when there's an incident, for instance, they take their time to analyze what's going on. And so what we need is a mix of those two skills in order to go the right direction. Another thing is, are we actually bringing the right people into the industry? And are we helping people to transition into cybersecurity? So I'm thinking about veterans, for instance, from the military and so on. Are we really making it easy for them to do that? And so I think we have a duty to mentor and support, and that's something that came up a lot in the research. The next one, and I think that's covered also in Alistair's research, is work-life balance and mental health. One keyword that came out of my research was passion. All of the CISOs I talked to, or head of risk or whatever, said, you don't do this job because you have to. You do it because you want to. So you need to have that passion. But with that passion comes a high level of stress and a heavy workload. And so balancing stress and sleep seem to be coming up a lot. Promoting mental health and work-life balance for security professionals from the outset. Once we start studying, they're going to need to understand, this is a job that's going to require your full attention. Not saying you're not going to have a personal life, but it's really a passion-driven job. And then the importance of physical, of emotional well-being to be successful in cybersecurity. So one of the questions we ask in the interview is, what do you do in order not to think about cybersecurity? And some of the answers are really cool. It goes from fishing to skydiving to chess to collecting old cars, miniature old cars, and writing a book about it. But it's kind of interesting that people need that out of cybersecurity kind of space in order to be able to come back with the same passion. And then balancing obviously the professional and personal commitments, because when something goes wrong, it might be at 12 midday on a Thursday, might also be at 7 p.m. on a Friday when you've made plans. Finally is the idea of leadership. The CISOs must understand how to talk to other leaders in the C-suite. They must be able to translate the issues that we talk about in plain business English. I mean, we love the 3-letter acronyms, or the 4 or 5-letter acronyms like TLS, SLA, QSA, SAQ, PCI, HIPAA. I mean, we lose them at the first letter, and it's our job to translate that. So effective communication and bridging the gap between a technical issue and a non-technical issue towards a business impact. What's the business impact of that issue, whether it's technical or not? And then the idea of building communities, bringing the business teams, the security teams, and the boards all together. So in the end, I think that the conclusion of the leadership discussion with the CISOs is that CISOs themselves need to be leaders, and they need to be able to speak to other leaders, because their role is crucial, it's pivotal, but if they don't translate things or communicate things the right way, there's going to be a problem. So this is a shameless plug here for the VigiTrust Global Advisory Board. It's a non-think tank, non-commercial think tank that I created about 12 years ago. We've got 1,350 members from 30 countries. In fact, Michael Conway spoke at it on a number of occasions. And it's all about bringing that community together. And that's really a pet project of mine, in terms of getting all of those people with great passion together, so that I no longer hear that being a CISO is a lonely job, because it shouldn't be. And in fact, my research surprised me. 80% of the people I talked to said that they didn't think that they were lonely. They might think that the team is not organized the right way, but they're not lonely. And so with that, what I'll do is I'll hand over to Alistair. Thank you again, Renaissance and team, for giving me that opportunity to share my views. And I'm going to stay for the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. It's interesting, one of the points you made about sleep. The amount of times when we're talking to CISOs, one of the first things that they mention is being able to sleep at night. But thank you, Matthew. As always, great insights.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. So yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our discussion today. So my name's Alistair Mills. As Norman said, I'm the Security Engineering Director at Proofpoint. About 3 years at Proofpoint now, and I believe the rule is that you stop counting after 20 years in the industry. So let's just leave it there. But yeah, looking forward to talking through, as Norman said, with some of our findings from Proofpoint's perspective. So Proofpoint run an annual survey with our CISO community. So this is our 4th annual survey that we've run, named Voice of the CISO. As I said, it's a 1,600 CISO community across 16 countries globally, where we ask them a range of subjects. And today, I'm only really going to give kind of a bit of a spoiler to that fuller report, but concentrating on some of the key themes that came out, and certainly relaying those to a number that Matthew's touched on just now with regards to CISO role, threats, and that board and wider organizational engagements. So yeah, just quickly, that report also is about 1,000 employees and above, so kind of focused on that enterprise space. And like I say, we break that down into the findings you'll see now, both in terms of per country, but also by sector, where we can see some different things and ultimately trends year on year, start to understand how that's progressing. So without further ado, let's get into some of the report findings. I think the first and foremost one I would give you is actually, if you were to, to not look at the report and to kind of disconnect now, although please don't, what you'll find is actually the key message that came out of the report is kind of this heightened concern, but maybe some growing confidence, right? And I think if we look back to the reports we've had, certainly since sort of 2022, which was a kind of a period of relative calm, dare I say, after the pandemic challenges have subsided. At that time, CISOs shared that kind of view with sort of 50% saying that they felt that they were at perhaps a lower risk of material breach. But then through 2023, what we've found is over 2/3 of CISOs really felt that risk coming back in, and that threat landscape had heated up again. And as they recalibrated their kind of levels of concern around that, sadly, we do find that continuing into 2024. Whereas you see on screen here, when we ask the question, what CISOs feel is them, are they at material risk of cyber attack in the next 12 months? On average, across the globe, we saw 70% of respondents saying that yes, they did. Obviously, you can see that breakdown individually in the graph below by country. But at the same time, that's perhaps not not a surprise to you. Certainly, when we think about again very much the pandemic is in the rearview mirror from a technology and a business use day to day, but definitely things like that working remote, hybrid workforces, all of those challenges are still ongoing for us. Obviously, we match in some of the things that have already been talked around about economic headwinds, potential layoffs, business restructuring, mergers, acquisitions. All of this becomes a moving feast for the security team to be able to solve against, with again, growing landscape issues maybe around things like supply chain and others that are presenting new and nuanced risks to the organization. So perhaps not a surprise, but certainly we'll come on to where perhaps some of that growing confidence comes from as we move through the presentation. But on from that, if you're concerned about a threat in the next 12 months, what is that threat? And that's where we asked again the community, what is top of mind for you when you think about the threat landscape? Now, perhaps no surprise to you is that ransomware was number one on that list. But equally, if you look across, and this is just the top responses that we had, what you'll also see is actually attacks are coming still from all angles, right? The CISO community don't really yet know where that next punch is coming from. And of course, as we think about the threat landscape in a perhaps a more technical view, a number of these threats are also quite blended, right? And I think that's something we've seen play out on the threat landscape where, maybe a while back, traditionally, you might have a kind of a one-on-one relationship between a type of threat or a type of attack equal to type of outcome. But certainly as we think about that today, for example, email fraud or business email compromise was number one in our last year report. That's moved down to number 3, only marginally again in terms of the percentages. But certainly we can see that play out in terms of that, business email compromise, essentially social engineering, then maybe leading to attacks of nature around ransomware or around compromises around malware or other. Those, of course, can initiate from supply chains. So I think also another lens I take on this data is actually that blend of threat also means that there's a blend of potential initial compromise or initial incident start that we can take from this data. But certainly as we talk to the CISO community, ransomware always featuring heavily in 1, 2, or 3 spot, and again at the top of that for this year. So let's break it down into a couple of other components. As Matthew talked around human error, and again, I think whether you're looking at different vendor-based data, whether you're looking at things like Verizon's DBIR, human error is always at the forefront of this, and probably for good reason. But when we break that down with our CISO community and ask them, are you in agreement, right? Do you believe that the human element or your employees are the largest cyber vulnerability you have? Quite clearly, 74% of them believe that human error could be their biggest cyber vulnerability. And again, you see that breakdown differently based on country, which gives a very interesting lens to that. But again, that has been pretty consistent, and it's consisted all the way from our first report back in 2021, and has continued to be around the same sort of number. Interestingly, if you do look at things like Verizon's DBIR, they also talk around that 70%. I think it sort of shifts a couple of percentage year on year, but again, hovering around the same sort of mark. Now, one interesting thing we did take from this is parallel to our Voice of the CISO report, we also run a board perspective report. And that's very much a similar type of engagement, but as the name suggests, with board communities. And when we talk to board communities around what did they perceive the human error could present to their organization, actually it was a much lower statistic. So albeit not a lot, but we saw it around the 60% mark, which again, when we think about how the CISO and the board are connecting on what are key issues and how are we going to look to resolve them, perhaps interesting to see that maybe, there's a bit of work still to get the board at the similar sort of level of what the CISOs are certainly saying in terms of that human risk and that element with things when we think about budgets, spend, and plans for current and future years. Now, some of you may be surprised that I've got to slide 7, and this is the first time I'm saying AI. But look, jokes aside, of course, it's a very topical conversation, and a lot of events and conversations I'm having with CISOs and CIOs really are revolving around both the use and misuse, as Matthew talked around, of AI in its various guises. I think here again, we looked to our CISO community to say, how are you viewing this problem? And 87% of CISOs are looking to deploy some kind of AI-powered capabilities. Again, we can split hairs around AI, ML, and perhaps what may be in use today, but certainly it's featuring very highly on the CISO's agenda. And again, from my own experience, it's interesting to see CISOs versus CIOs and how that dynamic plays out around AI use and adoption. CIOs obviously very focused on how can we make and adopt and improve the organization through the use of AI uplift. And obviously CISOs very much concerned around how is that misuse going to potentially come into play. But all along, the continual theme is we need to bake this in at the beginning, right? We can't retrospectively come back to the AI problem with the security components and thoughts after mind. We need to do that from the outset. So great to see that strong message coming out. Now, as you can see on screen, we do have a great quote from Martin, who's the CISO at Campbell Group. I won't read it verbatim, but if I was to kind of summarize what he says, I think it's a really interesting point, which is when he thinks about AI in that people context, he thinks that, really he's seen an increase in employees' awareness of those cyber responsibilities that they have. But that new understanding doesn't always necessarily equate to new capability from the employee in terms of that, detection, response, reporting, etc., that we're looking to them to achieve. And for him, that's where he's seeing great use cases for AI tooling can really come into play and bridge that gap, right? Can we augment what that end user is doing? We all know that they're hired for different things within their role, perhaps outside of cybersecurity. We get that awareness up, but obviously they're focused more on their day-to-day challenges. So how can we layer in some AI tooling, some guidance, some nudges, some pop-ups, some interaction with them in the right way? Obviously, we can't drown them with noise, but in the right way at the right time, can we engage with them to help be that check and balance? And of course, the great thing with AI is we get that feedback from the end user that can continually learn and develop to make sure that we're on point and we're not overloading them with those nudges. So perhaps shifting slightly in terms of taking away from that human element and thinking more about some realities of the CISO, I will just continue the AI conversation for a second and think about that kind of double-edged sword we talked about, right? And we asked again the percentage of CISOs who believe that Gen AI specifically was a risk to their organization, with 54% agreeing that they saw it pose as a risk to them. Probably not surprising when we think about that from a sector perspective, that education, healthcare, and public sector are perhaps more cautious in their use and adoption of AI, exactly as Matthew talked to, right? The data in, data out can be a real concern as they think about how they start to harness the power of these tools and make those more widely available to organizations. But even alongside Gen AI, obviously, again, all of the concerns around more collaboration tools, whether those are your Slacks, your Teams, the 365 is, the add-ons you can enable into those. I had one CISO talk to me the other day about, someone was just trying to, do more calls more effectively. So they'd integrated an add-on into their Teams calendar that was then able to go in and transcribe all of the meetings that they went to for notes for them to review afterwards. Well, guess what? That's a third-party organization that was pumping that data out to a location that wasn't on the CISO's agenda when he was thinking about data responsibility. So it's all of these different use cases that can come in and really, again, start to broaden the attack path and landscape that we have. So again, Matthew touched on this, and sadly a continuing trend when we look at our data across the years. But thinking about that CISO role and kind of expectations, 2/3, 66% of CISOs agreed that they faced excessive expectations of the role. That's up from just over 60% in 2023 and nearly half in 2022. So sad to see that that moving and trajectory is increasing. But I think, again, Matthew hits the nail on the head here. We don't do this for an easy life. We do this for a passion and for an enjoyment of the challenge that cybersecurity and that ever evolving challenge brings us. But those mounting expectations, coupled with high stress environments, shrinking budgets, impact on CISO's life, dare I say, thinking about things like personal liability within those roles, also, understandably lead to why our respondents said that over 53% of them had some kind of burnout within the last 12 months. So exactly as was talked around, I think thinking about what some of those core strategies are and being very meticulous around them is super key. But certainly the biggest one I hear in terms of an antidote from our CISO community is actually that network, right? So building out a really strong network, going to those types of events, sharing and connecting with other peers in your industry or in your type of role. Because ultimately these challenges that we faced, whilst nuanced by sector or organization, are largely the same. And it's definitely a true statement that problem shared is a problem halved, and being able to have a community that you can share and gain insight from is really going to be, I think, a strong key to ensure that we can try and get a grip on the burnout and expectations of the CISO role itself. Now, not to finish on too negative a note, I definitely wanted to bring back something really positive that we started to see from the report, which is that kind of board CISO relationship. And definitely we're seeing some really positive trends uncovered in this year's survey. So we asked them, the CISO community by industry, do they agree that they see eye to eye with the board on the issue of cybersecurity? And as you can see, that's a pretty resounding yes, and a huge improvement from where we were in 2023. And again, I think there's a number of factors at play here. But again, based on my experience, based on the conversations with our CISOs that I engage with, I think a lot of this comes down to communication. As was talked about earlier by Matthew, we need to very much put in the business terms and appropriate approaches of risk reduction versus, the phishings and the technical components that we have within our role. Acronyms aside, it becomes very complex. So speaking to the board in the board language, I think, also, as this is a societal problem, helps bring that mainstream thought to the board. I've seen also some great CISOs engaging one-on-one with board members to not just break down risk in terms of for the company, but within their own specific organizational unit, knowing that a CMO to a CFO is going to have a different appetite for risk and how that may show up within their organization. So again, bringing those those stories from the field and making that reality really, really clear for the board, I think, is again helping bridge that gap, which is really exciting for us, because again, when we certainly think about how we think back to some of the issues around perhaps human element and how we get that engagement and awareness working, we all know this needs to be a top-down approach. So having that board and C-suite really bought in and understanding the challenges of today, and then relaying that in their own context through their organizations, really helps to get a groundswell. So yeah, with that, one last plug for me, just to say again that report is available online. We're going to share the slides, I believe, afterwards, so you'll get the links to them. But a quick Google of Voice of the CISO will get you onto the 2024 report. We can download that free of charge and get a view at all of the other statistics and insights that we gained from this year's view, and what as trends back on the other years. So with that, I'd like to say thanks very much and pass back to Norman. I think we'll open up for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Alistair. It was hard to get unmuted there. That was struggling to press the button. So there are a couple of questions that have been sent to me directly. I suppose probably, Matty, this one might be for you. Question is, how can organizations bridge the gap between technical cybersecurity risks and the business language in board discussions? And I think Alistair, pointed onto that as well.
So I think that in order to do that, you need to go back to the business impact of the risk. I often get a little bit annoyed when people tell me that the board can't understand risk, because I don't think that's true. I think the board deals with risk all day long. They deal with financial risk, ESG related risk, HR risk, M&A risk, and so on. And cyber is just an additional risk that they may or may not understand and that they may or may not be concerned with. And so what you might want to do is you might want to make that relatable to them. And so what matters the most to the board? Well, it's that the company is going the right direction. So it's creating wealth for shareholders. It might be creating wealth for the community, paying tax, creating employment, having being recognized as a good workplace to be in, and so on. So how does cybersecurity contribute to that? So the whole idea of making them understand that cybersecurity and good compliance, good governance is good for business. One way of doing that is to link that to the financials. So once cybersecurity and or compliance appear as a line item on your monthly and quarterly recordings, audits and financials, you have the ability to show money in, money out. And right now, cybersecurity is not only seen as the department of no, but the department of costs that you can't justify. So look at all of the assets that you use for IT security and compliance. Try and identify the ones that are 95% just for compliance and for security. Put them on a different line item. Now you can start depreciating that as an asset across a few years. Now you can start saying, well, okay, I have cost of cyber insurance, but I also have assets here. And maybe I have a process. Maybe I built a new cybersecurity process. I implemented the 5 pillars of security framework. I implemented ISO. I implemented NIST or whatever. And that becomes one of the intangible assets on my list. One of the things that's super interesting to me is that if you look at most of the reports of NASDAQ quoted companies in the US, they will actually tell you that they have quarterly meetings where the CISO comes in and is given, a full 15 minutes to explain what they're doing. So what that means is that I'm not good at maths, but 4 quarterly times 15 minutes, that's an hour. So the CISO is given 1 hour per year to talk to the board. And so if you're a big company, that may or may not be a problem, because what you can do is you can essentially have a risk committee or an audit committee and work with them and make them your champion to talk to the right person in the boardroom. If you're a smaller company, those roles kind of blur into each other. And so you need to make sure that at any given time you show the potential of identifying assets, you show the potential of having cybersecurity and compliance as a line item on the financials, because once it's there, they have to look at it every month. It's not just every quarter. And you need to build that effective communication that you're their ally, and doing business in a more compliant way will open up new doors. And a typical example of that is, well, hey, board, if we're not in compliance with ISO 27001, we already lose 10% of our target markets, because that will always be part of their RFPs. So we have something to win. Long answer to a short question, sorry.
No, but very succinct, and thank you. Certainly interesting perspective as well. Alistair, I need you to put on your looking glass and tell me, what's your predictions for the following year?
Well, I think it's interesting. We do sort of cyber landscape predictions, and obviously we can predict into many areas, and quite often than not, sometimes those could be summarized as sometimes more of the same, but same but different, if we were to summarize, right? And if we looked to, as I say, the Verizon DBIR, I mean, when they talk about the human element, I think it was in the report last year where they actually said if we knew what we knew now, we'd just kind of copy paste, right? Because some of these core challenges are still there. We have awareness, we have understanding, we have ways to try and address, but at the same time, because the money is still there for the threat actor, the opportunity is still there from their perception, and it's working albeit in different ways and guises, we'll see that to continue to work, because if it's working, they won't change. So I think obviously it would be remiss of me not to say what is one of the biggest predictions. It's going to be the continual topic of AI, right, on both sides of the camp, for use, for good and misuse. So again, I think that's going to be something that we really start to see play out in terms of how organizations can make, meaningful use cases of that. And again, that's going to vary by sector, but I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that the CISO and cyber community will face is, again, how are we securing data? How are we making sure that that's appropriately used based on kind of some of the personas we talked around earlier, right? That well-meaning employee just trying to do their job, put source code into ChatGPT to speed things up and get a view of, is there a vulnerability in this? Well, that's the source code we've just versus someone who, for much more malicious purposes, is maybe looking to disrupt a model and therefore affect the outcome of that. So, those are new aspects that we're going to need to focus on. We're going to need maybe new tooling, a new policy to back those up. So again, I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that we will certainly need to track and monitor as the year ahead.
No, thank you very much. Matthew, this is probably coming from exactly what you're saying, Alistair, about AI. With AI becoming a pivotal tool in the attacking and protection of cyber threats, what do you believe are the emerging frameworks that are being considered for the ethical use of AI in cybersecurity?
That's a very interesting question. I've actually done a little bit of research on that. So right now there's about 40 to 45 AI governance frameworks and regulations and standards. So NIST came out with one. Obviously, we've got the regulation in the EU with the AI Act. We've got a couple of states in the US that have come out with their own AI governance framework. For a reason that escapes me, the city of Boston came out with its own framework, which is actually interesting. If you look at the evolution of regulation for data protection, so let's learn a little bit from history there. You go back to 1999, 2000. At that stage, there was about 100 security frameworks and regulations. So each vendor had their own framework or guidance or governance framework. And you look at the years where network security became content security, became data security, became privacy, became compliance. At every stage, you had less and less frameworks. You had a few new ones, but you had all of the other ones being flushed out. And you look at today, you really dial back to 5 or 6. PCI, GDPR, NIST, ISO, NIS, and there's one missing, but there's really only 6 that are driving the rest. And I think we are going to see the same with AI. And there's a couple of things as well to look at AI is AI has some potential implications for human safety, a bit more, I would say, than generic cybersecurity. And so my guess is that we're going to see some AI governance frameworks looking more at the data itself and poisoning of data, and is the data valid, and has it been analyzed the right way? And then there's going to be another one as what's the impact for human beings? Because I think that's slightly different. So I hate to make predictions because I normally, like many people that make predictions, get them wrong. But one thing that I think is true is that we're going to see another few frameworks coming out of the woodworks. And then over the next 5 years, it's going to be faster, I would say, than with cyber. And it's going to be distilled down to 10 or 12 that we can use for different aspects of AI. I don't know if Alistair would concur with me or not, but
yeah, I agree with you. And I think how we think about privacy has never been more important when we think about those uses of AI. So again, keen to see how the frameworks progress, but yeah, agree with me, Matthew.
No, very interesting. I suppose one thing that you mentioned earlier on, Alistair, and it happens, when any discussions I have as well, this whole human error, where you were talking about it doesn't seem to ever change. It's the same thing almost every year, and as you're your report set throwing it, that's true.
Mm.
How do you think we can ever change that, move the dial on it?
It's a great question, right? And I think it's one that has a lot of components to it. But what I'm encouraged by, if I look about how that's changing already, I think this movement from, we always used to think and joke a bit about within IT and cyber circles of, human being the weakest link, right? And it was always kind of with this negative context, right? So even then, when we think about human error, right, it's thinking about it in someone's done something wrong and maybe therefore there's a consequence. But again, we need to shift, and I'm seeing that in organizations we're working with, where we're seeing that shift to that cultural approach, right, where actually there needs to be a culture of openness around the subjects. And if you feel like you've done something wrong, you need to feel safe to be able to report that rather than trying to push that under the rug. So I think as we think about that moving forwards, it's really being as close to that end user community as we can be and making it as relevant for them, almost in the same way as we're engaging the board. I think stories and giving them an understanding of the societal problem of cyber, helping them connect maybe their own personal lives to things that may then affect the workplace and the organization they work for. If you can connect that risk and help them to understand why, hey, I'm just Alistair working on a specific thing within an organization. Why is someone going to be targeting me? Well, if I can start to understand that, that can be much more useful to the organization to respond. But there are a number of tried and tested approaches. So we have a conceptual model we call ACE. So assess, change, and evaluate, right? And that assessment needs to be done in order so you can meet that end user where they are. People are very technical, not very technical. If we start, with the wrong type of content to the right end user, we're going to switch them off. And therefore, we need to make sure that we can align those messages where that person is relevant to their role, relevant to the risk they're seeing. And as soon as we can get those two things closer, I think the message lands better. But I'm also keen that, that kind of shift from once annual, just next recording that gives me my enablement tick box. Those things need to change. And again, that's where I'm certainly keen to see that AI tooling augment what the user's doing, maybe to give them a bit of check and balance where the system can help check things in the background. Because certainly if we think about threats today, if I have a supply chain threat via a compromised supplier that's thread hijacking and doesn't have any malicious content in there, right? It's that business email compromise. How that just looks like normal business. And so we have to really strike that balance between affecting the business, i.e. blocking stuff we shouldn't, and actually enable those comms. So, it's a multifaceted problem, but again, I think there's a mixture of technology and engagement we can do that really helps to progress and to start to change those statistics.
If I can bounce back on that, we're in this industry, we're lucky that we have two times every year where cybersecurity and cyber awareness gets a lot of traction. And that's October with Global Cyber Awareness Month. And we see a lot of organizations providing more fun things around cybersecurity. And then we've got Global Data Privacy Day, which I think is every year, 28th of January. And I think that they're nearly kind of halfway during the year. And this is a nice way of having the enterprise or the business doing something every year for that. But I would agree that, that thing about getting trained upon higher and once annually after that, that's not good enough. What I prefer to see is bursts of micro learning, specifically for the younger people that are used to a 2-minute time span from reels and so on. You'd be surprised how fun you can make cybersecurity within 2 minutes, little things. And again, this is a shameless plug, but we do a thing called the VG quiz, where essentially we get a large team of people to compete with each other to win some prizes. So the prize might be a 20 euro Starbucks voucher or something, or it could be a mug, or it could be anything. Or you have teams competing with each other, and you ask them questions, serious questions with a choice of silly answers, or silly questions with a choice of serious answers with their impact. And you can see every five questions you stop and you've got the leaderboard and so on. And we're doing that, and it's very it's kind of exciting. It's making a topic that everybody thinks is boring and irrelevant actually relevant. And then at the end, you know, you just say, hey, we discussed those questions. If you've got more info, if you've got more questions, or there's a link to the policies of this is why it matters to us. And so it's that kind of ongoing engagement that we need to bring back into the business, you know.
Perfect. Unless anybody else has any more questions, I think we'll leave it there. And I'd like to thank both Alistair and Matthew for their time. Obviously, it's worthwhile downloading the reports from Alistair's side, and we very much look forward to your new book, Matthew, next year, hopefully. So thank you very much, and thank you everybody for attending. If you do have any questions in the next day or two, feel free to email over to us and we'll get them answered as well. But thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Norman. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.